devoted your life to astrology. You were a full-time practicing astrologer. Like,
yeah.
What compels you?
How
did that happen?
I don't know. I'm just obsessed with it. It started, I always knew that I was supposed to be a magician and occultist. I didn't know what all that meant. I always knew astrology was kind of interesting, sort of, but it was just like everybody was just, it was kind of part of my family normally, the way that people talked and stuff. And so I always did categorize people by their astrological sign or things like that. But when I got really into magic, I got really into, by that time it was the late 90s, early 2000s. So I was into coil and throbbing gristle and chaos magic and Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn stuff and Crowley and all this and chaos magic. I don't know if I mentioned chaos magic, but so I knew about astrology because you had to know it for magic, right? You had to know it for Hermetic magic. You had to know whatever sign, planets rising, planets in signs of dignity and stuff. But I didn't like horoscope astrology. I thought it was like basic or something, But then one day I got into horoscope, just my own chart, and was like, oh, there's something to this, right? Like now that I understand the planets from this kind of Hermetic magic perspective, when I saw it in terms of the chart and the, stuff like that, I was like, there's something to this. So at the time, I had already read tarot cards for people I'd probably been reading tarot cards for people since 2002. And I still have the same deck I still use the same deck that I used then. And it's still part of my practice. So it was like a side gig or like an aspect of my personality or I guess identity as an artist that people came and got their tarot cards read a bunch. And then people kept coming. And I was like, okay, well, we'll get to the tarot, but we're going to do some astrology first. So can I have your birth data, please? And I would look at their chart, and I felt that gave me a more informed, idea of how to interpret the cards, right? They speak the same language astrology and tarot do. So little by little, astrology started to dominate my practice, and astrology also simultaneously, I think, was just getting popular in like popular culture. So people kept coming, and I was like, okay, looks like this is my job now. Like my real job now. It just happened. I was never like, hey, let me be your astrologer. I just was doing it all the time. And so people saw me doing it forever, and I've lived in the same city for a really long time. So people just kept coming, and then I was like, well, I better really get good at this then. So I read a ton and I researched a ton and I did a lot of self-education, of course, and then I finally studied under Austin and graduated from his year 3, and now I'm studying under Freedom Cole in Jyotish or Vedic astrology, and also PJC, Sanjay Rath Parashara tradition.
Yeah.
So I just continue my education because you always want to know more. It's like you get to a certain point, and then you see what other astrologers can do in other cultures or other magicians. Like, oh my God, like I want to be able to do that, right? I want to be able to understand that. So I've dedicated myself to astrology as a practitioner because it's my job, but also as a I don't know what you'd call it, but somebody who understands the material as best as they can,
Absolutely. So this is such a basic question, but I feel it's so potent, is that when people say you meet someone at a party and you tell them, do you tell them you're an astrologer? And if they say, like, what is that? Like, how do you define astrology to people who have no clue?
I mean, it happens all the time. People ask me, what do you do? And I say, I'm an astrologer. And sometimes they think that I'm an astronomer. Like sometimes they're like, oh, cool. Like they think I'm like there, like NASA, and the observatories and stuff like that. And then other times they're like, astrology? Like, really? Like, how do you make money off that? I'm like, people come and have sessions with me in private consultations, And, yeah, it's not that, most people, if they know what astrology is, they can imagine having a private consultation practice with it,
The question I get a lot is, can you make money doing that?
Yeah. One guy asked me kind of recently, like I was at a party, I think it was like over the summer, and he's known me for a long time, but it doesn't, we're friends peripherally.
Yeah.
And he's like, so what's your day job? And I was like, what do you mean, what's my day job? And actually, I made art for so long, so I think I thought he assumed, and I still do, but I think I assumed he meant, what do I do besides make visual art?
Yeah.
So I said, I'm an astrologer. And he was like, because that is my day job. And he's like, or maybe I said, I don't have a day job. I was like, what do you mean, what's my day job? And he's like, oh, like, you mean you can make money from being a sorcerer? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I guess you could call it that, But then I was talking to someone else the other day, my Rolfer, I get Rolfed, like the deep massage. And he was saying about I was like, is there something esoteric or metaphysical about Rolfing? And he's like, no. He's like, I suppose so that you could take it there. But he's like, I don't see it that way. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how I see astrology. Like, I know there's a metaphysical component, and I know that obviously that there's a magical and supernatural component to it to a certain degree, but I also see it as something that, like, I don't know, can be mastered the same way that, or in similar ways to, say, chemistry, right, or astronomy, or medicine, or, weaving socks for people, or whatever,
So how has, like, your personal astrology practice, so you started with tarot in 2002, and then it's just sort of like evolved from there. I mean, you have studied for years now, right? Traditional or Hellenistic astrology. How was the evolution to that? Or is that where you started in your studies?
Hold on. Do you want to sit down?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Are you sure?
Yeah, this is great. I like looking around.
Okay, so sorry, what was the question?
You have a background in traditional astrology. Is that kind of where you jumped in? Like, what has been the evolution of your own personal astrological practice, client facing?
Well, my background started in Hermetic magic and in occultism that does have its origins in, basically Alexandrian fusion between, Hellenistic thought and Egyptian priestcraft, or so the legend at least goes, or history at least goes. Yeah. So it started there. I mean, I've been into that stuff forever. I mean, the sources that were available anyway, like Agrippa, right? Picatrix at the time was not translated into English yet, and I don't read Latin, but we had a lot of stuff. It's not like all of a sudden, whoa, this vault opened. It's like, we had Agrippa, like I know that, like, the Golden Dawn is not fashionable right now, but there's a lot of material in there that is very esoteric and rooted in a lot of ancient magic and grimoire traditions and Enochian magic and all sorts of stuff like that. So magic was around before Rune Soup. You know what I mean? It's like people were doing it. You know what I mean? It's not like this whole like all of a sudden people got interested in the Grimorium Verum again, and they translated Picatrix, and now we know. It's like, no, we always knew. It just was less popular.
And that's like for the astro nerd, that's some really great context, because I think there's this idea that maybe either like everyone was a modern astrologer and like sort of maybe like more like Jungian or something until like the 90s and Project Hindsight. And so you were always sort of working with these old texts.
Was in the capacity of magic, but not astrology.
Okay.
Because that's where the distinction is. Because in as far as magic goes, we had that stuff.
Yeah.
But we didn't have, for example, all these translations of like Valens, right, and Ibn Ezra and Abu Mashar and all these stuff that all this Hermetic astrology, or even some texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, right, and the work of Project Hindsight and Firmicus Maternus and all these like Hermetic sources of horoscopic astrology.
Yeah.
Those are new. At least the translations of a lot of those are new, right?
Okay.
The English translations of a lot of them are new, right? Ben Dykes, Project Hindsight, all those people. So yeah, and that's why I thought astrology was boring, because I didn't realize how Hermetic it was. I mean, I knew how Hermetic astrological magic was,
yeah,
but I didn't know how Hermetic horoscope astrology could be. And, and it wasn't like some like lady in New Mexico petting her cat in a furry sweater or something like that. It's so how esoteric astrology really was. You only knew that in its context of magic, but you might not know it in its context of horoscopic astrology, because those are the texts that are newly available. Yeah, but the magical ones are with some exceptions, of course, but they have been around.
So how is let me jump into the present. You've recently, as you've mentioned, started studying Jyotish or Vedic astrology.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration there to move in that direction? How is it different, and how does it overlap?
I'd gotten to a point in my practice of traditional astrology from the West where I was, and I have by no means exhausted Vedic Valens, Firmicus Maternus, or even Marsilio Ficino, who I feel like I know quite a lot about, but stuff like that. There's always more to learn from those traditions. But I was so captivated, maybe by, I've never really put it this way or thought of it this way, but maybe the inherent magic that is in Jyotish, how ritual is so emphasized as a remedy. Because I started out as a magician, I'm not as interested in counseling someone on just like, oh, this is going to happen and oh, but you do you, or whatever, like the way a lot of astrologers do. I want to be like, well, let's fix this. Let's work with this, right? Let's do something with it. And because I have a background in magic, that's how I've always lived my life.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, if this is something and I don't like this, I'm going to work around it. And if I can't figure out a physical way to work around it, I can maybe find a subterranean or psychic way to work around it, right? And that's what magic is. So that's how at least this tradition of the Parashara tradition of Jyotish is very oriented that way. And it's funny, you hear sometimes from the Vedic teachers, they're like, avoid Tantra, avoid black magic, like be sure to stay away from all this stuff. And then you hear Freedom Cole talk, and he's like, so then, like, Freedom's like, so somebody's chart says they can't have a baby, so we give them a remedy and they can have a baby. And I was like, well, wait, how does that differ from black Tantra, from black magic, right? How does that differ from magic? Because you're doing a ritual to achieve a certain result. And Freedom's like, yeah, he's like, the problem with the word Tantra is that it's been conflated either here in the West, we have some weird sex magic idea of it, which is inaccurate because that's only a fragment of what Tantra really is. Tantra is essentially esoteric Buddhism, Jainism, or Hinduism, right? And the way Freedom Cole defined it is ritual that is done by somebody who is not an initiated priest. Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's magic you do yourself. That's what esoteric religion is. It's ritual that you yourself perform. And so, and then of course, Tantra also in India itself, they use that word to mean black magic, but it doesn't mean that. It's what black magic is magic with ill intent, right? Magic to designed to harm somebody or something like that. But magic in that tradition is just fine, right? Achieving a ritual performing a ritual to achieve a certain result. That's what a good astrologer should do, right? They should help somebody change circumstances or suffering in their life that they're discontented with. And I was like, oh, great. That's totally along the lines of what I've already very much been definitely doing on myself and doing my best to incorporate into my work with my clients. It's like you don't have to passively sit down and take this transit. The bad thing is still going to happen, right? But you can mitigate the ill effects of that bad thing, and you can optimize strengths and direct certain things according to will, right? It doesn't always have to be just like, oh, let me tell you about yourself. It's like, no, this is coming up and it could be trouble. Let's see what we can do to fix it, right? So the inherent quality of Jyotish and the Parashara tradition of like, oh yeah, like remedies, right? Mm-hmm. And remedies is almost a soft word because what a great deal of it is magic rituals. Magic rituals to change your life, to change your karma, to change your life situation in ways that are more satisfying, ways that alleviate suffering. So that's always been a goal of mine as an astrologer anyways. Yeah. And the potency and power that Jyotish demonstrated with its abilities to do such things was like, oh, I gotta go there next time, you know?
Has studying Jyotish additionally changed or deepened your relationships with the planets or how you view them?
Yeah, it's deepened it. For sure. In a big way. Yeah. I mean, also, you have to be broad-minded enough to be able to work with a different zodiac and a different philosophical system, right? In some ways, planets mean different things in Jyotish than they do in traditional Western astrology. And signs definitely mean different things. Houses can mean different things. Yeah. So you have to, but that doesn't make one irrelevant or the other irrelevant. It's just several different lenses through which you're viewing the same thing. And the more lenses that you have, the more complexity and refinement and detail you're able to apply to astrology and the material, right? Just because I find Vedic astrology so powerful and their use of the sidereal zodiac very powerful doesn't mean I have to discard the I still use the tropical zodiac in my readings for clients, but I cheat and I look at their tropical charts, sidereal charts too.
Yeah,
it's still time on TV. Yeah, we'll bring the TV back, but I need an assistant. So if anybody out there wants to be my assistant, applications are being accepted. I mean, there's multiple ways. I taught a magic, it's still available now, just the recordings part, but I taught a magic class on Jason Liu's website, magic.me, and yeah, it was great. Like, I taught all these people, like, oh, sure, how to just, like, have an astrological magic practice, and they do it, and it works, you know what I mean? It's like, I was like, we had a meeting, they did the class on the recordings, you know what I mean? And it's, like, probably 2 hours worth of recordings or something absurd. Yeah. And of course, you know, I did it in such a way. Well, I combined Hermetic stuff with it, right? So, or Kabbalistic magic, right? Of course. So it's like, all right, well, if you're using angels, right? And you're using, and you know, that was really the main difference between Pico and Ficino, right? Pico della Mirandola is like, well, you need Kawa, right? You need to be able to call the angels. Like, you need this alphabet in their names. And it's interesting because Jyotish is the same, or similar, right? The syllables and the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet have magical power, and you call deities by saying certain words and saying certain names. And with Hebrew Kabbalah, it's the same, right? You got to call the angels. So, you know, there's nothing wrong, even if your election isn't perfect, with having a planetary practice using angelic and divine names if you're praying, right? If you're using prayer, right, your house isn't going to explode if you pray to, Haniel, the archangel of Venus, and it's, she's in the 8th house or something, so you're going to be okay. So I felt that working with angelic magic was a good way to start people off, right? Because they don't need to be that. They don't require as much astrological expertise, I mean, some people who've been studying astrology for years can't even construct a good election, right? So the other thing is to engage with elections, right? And that's why I use elections as something that Time Lord TV provides and not horoscopes, because it's like elections everybody can use. If I'm going to sit here and tell you like what I think about Saturn entering Pisces, like how useful is that to you really? Like how are you really going to use that? You can't use it. And that's why I was attracted to Vedic astrology in the first place, and magic in the beginning was because like we should be able to interact with the cosmos. We should not we should be. It's not like I'm demanding the right to. I believe that humanity has that ability and has that capacity, and I think it's something that we should exercise. So even if you don't want to perform ritual magic, you can use a good election to call somebody who you want to get a yes from. You know what I mean? Or like every single time I've used an election to reach out to somebody for a certain result, I have gotten the thing that I wanted, right? And I didn't perform any rituals at all. I was just like, I really want to get my buddy into this class or something. Let me reach out to the person who's going to let him in at this time. Boom, I do it, works out. You got a yes. So if you engage with the universe just in that way, not even ritualistically, just using time and the inherent power and capacity of time, you can achieve results that way.
How would you describe electional astrology to someone who has no idea what we're talking about right now?
Electional astrology is choosing an auspicious time to begin something or set something in motion, right? Because time is inherent with certain qualities, and we use astrology to determine or sense the qualities of that time. So just like everybody has a birthday or everybody has a wedding anniversary and all that stuff, and everybody has a grand opening of their business or whatever, asking someone on a date has a birthday, right? Asking someone for a favor has a birthday. Trying to get the money from the gallery that you're not on such good terms with or whatever can have a birthday. And if you do it at a moment where things are the weather, you might even say, is designed for things to go more smoothly, you will get better results. And I mean, I've got like hundreds of cases to prove it, and hundreds of cases of patrons who use it and stuff too. Magic has definitely enhanced my life, and it has definitely afforded me experiences and adventures and pleasures and disruptions and chaos and all kinds of things that it's impossible to know, actually. I mean, it's impossible to know how my life would be different if I didn't practice magic, because it's so ingrained in it at this point that it's all a big convergence, you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, and it's hard for me to actually say this, and mean it, but I guess I've always kind of been a successful person in a way. I'm horrible with getting my shit together and credit cards. I don't own a house or any of that stuff or anything like that. But it's like I've always gotten what I felt like I wanted. I've always been able to use my talents and my capacities in the scope and scale that I wanted to use them. So and the art practice and the music and all that stuff, magic was always an inherent part of that, and I stayed loyal and I stayed true and I stayed committed to a path of magic, and occultism, and people notice that. People notice when they're like, okay, well, we should maybe call him because like for 20 years he's been doing this stuff and he's been making art like this and expressing this through his work or his writing or his whatever. But I think like more than magic, anything that's made me successful is like commitment, right? Or like just being inspired, being enthusiastic and in love with something and dedicated to something, like whatever. I've had say unsuccessful relationships, but they weren't the ones I wanted. I mean, I respect them as part of my path, and I respect everything that I did or have done in my life as part of a path and part of a trajectory that led me here. I never thought I'd be a professional astrologer because I didn't especially want to be one. But then you have to be committed, and not everybody is. Mm-hmm. So, and in some ways, magic is something that you kind of have to be called to do. Mm-hmm. In some ways it's because it requires a complete like obsession. Yeah. And it requires a complete like, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice for me because there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. Yeah. But it's a sacrifice. I mean, it's like when I'm not working, I'm studying. I mean, I have a social life and I have, I have a life, but right now astrology and magic are the center of that, and they almost always have been. So it's like, you have to be able to, it's difficult to explain to someone how to start out. It really is. I mean, take a class, like take Austin's class, take my class, take there's classes that you can work with the PGM. There's classes that you can work with the Picatrix, right? You can be guided by these things. I'm twice the astrologer that I was before I studied under Austin. Yeah. He taught me so much. So it's like be humble and learn under somebody else if you really want to get serious about it. Because otherwise, how can I guide somebody just right now, telling them how to start a magical practice at home? You're not going to be able to do it unless you're either naturally magically talented, which most people actually are, more than they think. But it requires natural talent, like anything, and it also requires the right guidance from somewhere, right? Either from a book, or if you're intuitive enough to whatever, light a fire and do something witchy and hope that it works. Who's to say that that's not legitimate magic? I don't say that it's not. It works great, So it's like, but do stuff. Yeah. Do rituals, like, if you want to be an astrologer, you got to give readings. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter how well you can quote balance. It doesn't matter at all. If you can't help anybody with that information, right? You're gonna tell them, oh, what you got? Venus conjoined Mercury and Moon. That means that you will be a brigand, and if it's in the 6th house, you will have sex with a lame, crippled servant 3 times, and stuff like that. It's like, it doesn't matter how good of a scholar you are. You have to be a practitioner, So I guess the advice I would give is like, be committed to a practice. Right? Be committed to a meditation practice, be committed to a magic practice, and if you're studying astrology, don't just study it. Give readings for free if you have to. And because that's what makes you an astrologer. Not how many books you read or how much you can talk about the lots of spirit and fortune. It's how much you can help people out, and help them improve their life.
Perfect. Thank you. I think this is good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's fantastic.